Eleanor Prentiss stood 4 feet from the Dowager Duchess of Wexcombe, close enough to fill her cup, when the older woman began numbering the women a duke might marry. She named them one by one. She did not number Eleanor. And Eleanor did not stop pouring. She finished the cup. She set the pot down without a sound. The dowager was arranging her son's prospects aloud among 6 young candidates, and she spoke to the whole room. She never once spoke to the woman holding the pot. "She is too old for any man here," the dowager said. 6 young women heard it. The Duke heard it. The assembled house at Michaelmas heard it, and because it was not addressed to Eleanor, she could not answer it without confessing she had listened. Across the drawing room, the Duke set down his cup. He said nothing. 3 days later, a ducal carriage stopped at the gate of a rented cottage. It was the first of 9 visits. If your future was ever discussed in front of you, as though you had already finished having one, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Not to the sentence, to the quiet before it. Wren Cottage sat at the low end of Nether Wexcombe, in Hampshire, where the lane ran down to the water meadow and the church bell carried on a still morning. It was small. It was hers, in the way rented things are yours, hers to keep clean, hers to worry over, hers until Lady Day. Eleanor Prentiss had lived in it 4 years. She had buried a husband before that and had learned in the burying exactly what a woman is worth when the man is gone. She was 39 years old. She had 2 children and £45 a year. That was the pension. £45 from the Admiralty for the widow of Lieutenant James Prentiss of the Royal Navy. It came twice a year, and it came late, and it never came larger. Out of it she paid £12 for Thomas at the day school, and £12 for Clara, and the rest she stretched over coal and candles and boots that grew too small too fast. She did the sums often. She did them the way some women say their prayers, under her breath, at night, hoping the numbers had softened while she slept. They never had. On the mantel stood the sextant. It was brass, and it caught the firelight, and it was the one beautiful thing in the house. It had been her husband's. She polished it every Sunday with a soft cloth and a little rouge, until the arc of it gleamed and the small mirrors threw light on the ceiling. The children were forbidden to touch it. Thomas, who was 11 and full of his father, had asked 100 times. The answer was always the same. "Not yet. It is not a toy. It is your father's." And Thomas would put his hands behind his back and look at it as though it might speak. The county liked Eleanor Prentiss. That is to say, the county liked the idea of her, a naval widow, genteel, quiet, respectable in her poverty. She was the sort of woman a lady could praise at a dinner and forget by breakfast. They admired her in the abstract. They invited her nowhere in particular. She had learned not to mind. Or she had learned to look as though she did not mind, which, after enough years, is nearly the same thing. There was one shadow on the near horizon, and she did her best not to look at it. The lease was up at Lady Day. The ground agent, a thin man named Cool, who smelled of ink and apology, had let it be known that the rent would rise. £18 it had been, 30 it would be, nearly double, on a lane where nothing had changed but the number the landlord wanted. She had heard it in June. It was months off. She did not think of it, or rather she thought of it once, felt the floor tilt under her, and put it away in the drawer of her mind where she kept the things she could not yet fix. That was the woman. That was the life. Small, upright, watchful, and out of anyone's way. And then came Michaelmas. The invitation to Wexcombe Park was not, strictly, an invitation. It was a request. The housekeeper there was short 2 respectable women to help pour and carry for the gathering, and Mrs. Prentiss was known to be gentle in her manners and glad of a coin. Eleanor took it. 3 shillings was 3 shillings, and pride does not buy boots. She went up to the great house on the last warm afternoon of September and put on a borrowed apron in the servants' passage and was told where to stand and when. Wexcombe Park was the sort of house that makes a person feel temporary. Long windows, ceilings you could lose a shout in, and that afternoon it was full of the county's marriageable daughters brought like flowers to a table. Arranged for one purpose, the Duke of Wexcombe was to look them over. He had been looked over for, if the truth be told, for 3 years running. His mother saw to it. Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Wexcombe, was 41. He stood by the far window with a cup he did not drink from, and he had the particular stillness of a man who has been the subject of other people's plans for so long that he has stopped expecting to be asked his own opinion. He was not unkind to look at. He was not warm to look at. Either he looked like a man waiting for a train that is always late. His mother did the talking. Augusta Ashworth, Dowager Duchess, moved through the room like weather. She had a voice that carried without being raised, and she used it now to take an inventory. Not of the furniture, of the girls. "Miss Veerley is 19, she said, to a knot of guests, loud enough to reach the girl herself, who coloured prettily and pretended not to hear. An excellent age. And an excellent settlement. She moved on. The Fanshawe girl is 21, a little old to be still unspoken for, but the family is sound. She named a third and a fourth. Ages, fortunes, complexions, she weighed them like a woman at a market who means the seller to know she is not easily pleased. Eleanor moved among them with the pot. She poured. She did not exist, and that was the arrangement, and she was content to keep it. She had learned to be furniture when furniture was safest. The Duke's eye passed over her once. Only once. She was refilling a cup at his elbow, and he glanced at the hand and then, idly, at the face, and something moved behind his own, a small effort of memory. The look of a man half hearing a bar of music he once knew. "Prentiss," he murmured, not to her, to the air. "I knew the name once." He let it fall like nothing. Eleanor's hand did not shake. She finished the cup and moved on. But she carried the moment down the length of the room the way you carry a coal in your palm, wondering when it will start to burn. It was perhaps 20 minutes later that the Dowager grew bored of measuring the young ones and, as a woman will when she is very sure of herself, reached for a lower figure to sharpen the higher ones against. "One wants freshness," she was saying. "One wants years enough for children, and none to spare. Consider," and here she gestured, with the smallest tilt of her chin, toward the woman with the pot, toward Eleanor, not at her, past her, as one gestures at a chair when explaining a point about chairs. That is a widow, perfectly respectable. And how old do we suppose? 40. Near enough. You see the difficulty. She let the room see it. She let the 6 young faces turn, briefly to look at the difficulty, and then turn away, reassured of their own value by the comparison. She is too old for any man here. There it was. In full. Spoken to the room, never to her, so that it could not be answered. Eleanor stood with the pot in her 2 hands. The tea steamed. Somewhere a clock ticked. And she did the only thing that was left to a woman in her place. She finished pouring the cup she had begun. She did not spill a drop. She set the pot down on the tray. She dropped a small correct curtsy to the room in general, to no one, and she turned and walked toward the passage door with her spine as straight as a mast. She did not hurry. That was the whole of her defence, and she spent it well. She walked the length of that long room at an even pace, past the girls and the fortunes and the ages. And she let no one see the colour in her face, because she did not permit her face to have any. Behind her, though she did not see it, and would not learn it for weeks, the Duke of Wexcombe set down his cup on the sill. Untouched, full, he set it down as though it had suddenly grown too heavy to hold, and he looked at the door she had gone through for a long moment after it closed. Eleanor walked home in the dusk. She gave the 3 shillings to the drawer where the small money lived. She heard Thomas's lessons and mended a seam in Clara's pinafore by the last of the light. And when the children were asleep, she took the sextant down from the mantel and polished it, though it was not Sunday, because her hands wanted something to do that they were sure of. She rubbed the brass until it shone. She put it back. She told herself the words did not matter. She was nearly right. 3 days later, the carriage came. She heard it before she saw it, the wrong sound entirely for the lane, wheels too fine, horses too matched. She looked out, and there it stood at her gate, ducal, absurd, a thing from another country parked in front of her failing hedge. A footman handed down the Duke of Wexcombe, who came up the path in the ordinary daylight with his hat in his hand, and Eleanor stood in her own doorway with a wooden spoon still in her fist, and could not for the life of her think what to do with her mouth. "Mrs. Prentiss," he said, "forgive the intrusion." She curtsied. She was aware of the spoon. She put it behind her. He did not come in, she had not asked him, and he did not presume, but stood on the step, turning his hat, and got to it plainly, as though plainness were a thing he had decided upon in advance and meant to hold to. "I have come about a matter of the parish school," he said. "I am told your son is quick." That was not what she had braced for. She had braced for charity. She had braced for the soft, unbearable kindness of a great man come to give a poor woman a shilling and go away feeling clean. This was not that. "Thomas is 11, she said. "He does his sums well, his letters better." "There is an examination," the Duke said, "for a place at the grammar school in Winchester. It is sat in the spring. Boys of promise are put up for it, and the place carries the fees." "I do not ask to pay for anything, madam. I ask whether you would permit the boy to sit it. That is all. A question, not a purse." She looked at him. She was good at looking at men and finding the hook in the offer. She looked for it now and could not at once find it. "Why," she said, "would you trouble yourself?" And there, for just a moment, the stillness in him cracked, and something honest came through it, awkward as a boy. "Because," he said, "I heard a thing said in my house 3 days ago that ought not to have been said, and I find I would rather not have heard it." He did not name it. He did not need to. "I cannot unsay it for you. I would not insult you by trying. But a clever boy ought to sit his examination, and I have the ordering of the parish's places, and it costs me nothing but a signature. Will you let him?" Eleanor Prentiss was not a woman who cried in front of dukes. She did not begin now, but it took her a moment, and she used it, and when she had command of her voice she said, "Thomas would like that very much." "Good," said the Duke, and he put his hat on, and bowed, and went back down the path, and the ridiculous carriage carried him away, and Eleanor stood in the door until she could no longer hear it. She told herself it was the school. It was a kindness to the boy, that was all, a great man being idle with his power in a way that happened to fall softly for once. She told herself that firmly, and she believed it for nearly a fortnight, until the second visit. The roof had been failing over the children's room since the spring. She knew it. She had a bucket for it, and a way of setting the beds clear of the worst run, and a habit of not mentioning it to anyone, because there was nothing to be done that £30 rent and £45 pension left room to do. On his second call the Duke did not, at first, seem to notice it. They spoke of the examination. He asked, quietly, after the boy's reading, and listened to the answer as though it were news he wanted. But he had eyes, and the stain on the plaster was the size of a dinner plate, and when he had gone she found she had somehow told him about the leak without meaning to, the way a tired person will, when someone asks a gentle question at the right hour. 4 days after that, a cart came from the estate with slates on it, good grey slates, and a man to lay them, and a note in the Duke's own hand. It said only that the estate had a surplus of slate from a re-roofing, that it would be wasted, and that he would take it as a favour if she would let his man use it up on her cottage, rather than cart it back. There was no mention of a debt. There was no mention of thanks. He had built the thing so that she could not refuse it without being foolish, and could not thank him for it without calling him a liar, and so she stood in the lane and watched a stranger mend the roof over her children's beds, and she pressed her lips together and let the man work. That night the rain came, and for the first time in a year it did not come in. She lay awake, listening to it not come in. And she understood, with something close to fear, that a degree of the thing had shifted. She had let something pass the gate that she did not know how to name. The third visit brought the mare. Clara was 8, and horse-mad in the hopeless way of little girls with no horse, and the Duke had somehow learned it, Thomas, most likely, who had lost all his shyness of the great man and now waited at the gate for the carriage like a dog for its master. This time it was not a carriage. It was a groom, leading an old grey mare with a soft eye and a swayed back, gentle as Sunday. "She is eating her head off in my stables," the Duke said, when he came the next day to see how the animal did. "Too old to hunt, too slow to sell. She wants a child to fuss over her, and I have none. If the girl would exercise her, she does me a service." It was a lie, of course. It was a beautiful, careful lie, cut to exactly the size of a woman's pride, and Eleanor knew it, and he knew she knew it, and neither of them said so. Clara named the mare Duchess, which made the Duke laugh. A real laugh, short and surprised, the first Eleanor had heard from him, and Eleanor, watching her daughter's face against the grey neck, forgot for a whole minute to be careful, and laughed too. That was the first time they laughed together. It counts. Small things count when a life has been swept clean of them. It was on the day of the mare that she called him by his Christian name for the first time, and did not notice she had done it until it was out. He had said something dry about his mother, some careful wry thing that gave her leave to smile, and she had answered, "You are wicked, Edmund," and then heard herself, and stopped, and coloured. He did not remark on it. He only looked at her a half-second longer than a duke ought to look at a widow, and let it stand between them like a coin on a table that neither will pick up. Edmund, she had said it. The gate, whatever it was, stood a little further open. And then, as if the world felt the balance shifting and moved to steady it, another caller came to Wren Cottage. Not in a carriage. On foot, in a blue coat gone pale at the seams, with the roll of a man more used to a deck than a lane. "Mrs. Prentiss," he said, and took off his hat, and she knew him before he gave the name. "You'll not remember me. Robert Hale. I served with James. On the Meridian, and before her." She remembered. Not the face, but the name. James had written it in letters. Hale did this, Hale said that. A steady man, a good officer. And here he was, Captain Hale now. Come at last to pay a call 4 years too late, with his hat in his hands and his heart, she saw within the quarter hour, entirely on his sleeve. He was everything the Duke was not. He was warm where the Duke was careful. He spoke of James easily, with love, and let her speak of him too, which no one in the county had done in years. He stayed to tea and made Thomas show him a knot and taught him a better one. He was kind and plain and safe, and by the time he rose to go she understood, the way a woman always understands these things. Long before the man will say them, that Captain Robert Hale had come to Nether Wexcombe to offer her a harbour. A respectable second marriage, a roof that was hers by right and not by a duke's careful lie, a name and a pension of his own, and a man who had loved her husband and would be steady to his children. She could have it for the asking. She saw that clearly. And she saw, too, that a wise woman, a woman with £45 a year and a rent doubling at Lady Day, would take it, and be grateful, and sleep soundly. She walked him to the gate. He held her hand a moment longer than a friend of her husband's needed to. "I'll come again, ma'am," he said. "If I may." "You may," she said, because it was true, and because it was kind, and because some part of her that had done the sums all these years knew what the sums said. But that night she did not think of Captain Hale. She stood at the mantel with the cloth in her hand, though it was not Sunday, and she polished the brass, and she thought of a man who mended roofs by lying about slate, and gave old horses to little girls, and asked her a question instead of handing her a purse. She thought of the word Edmund, sitting on the table between them where neither had picked it up. She told herself it was foolishness. She told herself he was a duke, and she was a woman his own mother had priced and dismissed to a room. She told herself that whatever this was, it could go nowhere, and that a woman who let it go somewhere was a woman asking to be broken. She was still telling herself that when the great blow fell, not at the cottage, but at Wexcombe Park, where she was not, and where the thing was decided that would send the whole county's tongues to wagging, because the Duke had gone home. And his mother had had enough. Augusta Ashworth had watched the carriage go down to that cottage once, and let it go, and told herself it was charity. She had watched it go a second time, and grown thoughtful. Word of a mare, and slates, and a widow's boy put up for a Winchester place had reached her by the third, and now the candidates were still lingering at the park, Miss Vearley chief among them, waiting on a decision that would not come, and the Dowager understood at last that her son was not being idle with his power. He was courting. Down there, in a rented cottage over a leaking roof, a Duke of Wexcombe was courting a widow of 40 with 2 children and £45 a year. She had him into the long drawing-room to end it. The same room, the same girls, some of them, and Miss Vearley fresh and 19 and certain of her place. Augusta meant it to be public, because public shame had always been her surest instrument, and it had never once failed her. "You will oblige me," she said before them all, "by putting an end to this cottage nonsense." Miss Vearley has been more than patient. The county is beginning to talk. You have a name to think of, and I will not have it dragged down a lane after a woman old enough to— Mother, he did not raise his voice. He almost never did. But there was a new thing in it now, and the room heard it, and went still. He set down his cup, untouched again. She would remember later that it was always untouched. And he stood. "I have decided," said the Duke of Wexcombe, "not to see any of these ladies again. They have been more than patient, and I am sorry for it, and I will say so to each in turn. But I will not choose among them, because I have already chosen elsewhere, and I mean to ask the ladies' leave to call upon her openly, as a suitor, before this county and this house and yourself." He looked at his mother. He looked at Miss Vearley, whose colour rose and fell and could not settle, because in all her 19 years no one had ever taught her the shape of the word no. "I am going to court Mrs. Prentiss," he said, "in the sight of everyone, and I would be glad of your blessing, though I will do it without." The Dowager rose. Her voice, for once, was not steady. "You will make yourself a fool. You will make this house a byword." "That woman is, for 3 years," said her son, quietly, and the quiet of it was worse than any shout. The room chose. Every season a fresh table of daughters, and I was walked past them like a horse past a manger, and asked to prefer. "This one time in my life, madam, I will." And he bowed to her, correct to the last, and left the room, and the county had its news by nightfall, running down every lane in Hampshire faster than any carriage. The Duke of Wexcombe had refused Miss Vearley. The Duke of Wexcombe would court the widow at Wren Cottage. The old Duchess had said her piece in front of everyone, and for the first time in her life it had not been obeyed. It had cracked. Whatever had held the two of them apart, the ice of rank, of years, of a sentence spoken to a room, it had cracked clean across, and everyone from the park to the church could hear it groaning. But down at the cottage, Eleanor Prentiss knew none of this yet. She sat at her own table with the lease in her hand. Cool the agent had left the new papers that very afternoon, £30 writ plain, due at Lady Day, more than she had in the world, and across the mantel the brass sextant caught the firelight and threw it soft on the ceiling. She was doing the sums. She was doing them under her breath, like a prayer, hoping the numbers had softened. They had not. She had a captain who offered a harbour, and a duke who mended roofs and told beautiful lies, and a rent she could not pay, and a name a great lady had said aloud she was too old to be worth. And out on the dark lane, coming down toward her gate for all the county to see, a ducal carriage had already turned in from the park. She did not yet know he was coming to court her in the open. She did not yet know why he had come to her at all, the true reason, the one buried out past the West Africa station under a cold sea, the debt that would explain every slate and every mare, and turn all this warmth to ash in her mouth the moment she learned it. She only heard, in the quiet of her small kitchen, the wrong sound on the lane again. Wheels too fine. Horses too matched. Coming closer, she set down the lease. She put her hand flat on the table, and she waited for the knock. The knock came soft. 2 raps, no more. She opened the door, and there he stood on her step with his hat already in his hand. "Mrs. Prentiss," Edmund said. "May I come in?" She stepped back. What else was there to do? He filled her small kitchen the way he filled every room, and yet he did not seem to know it. He turned the hat in his hands. He looked at the lease on the table and did not read it, and looked at the sextant on the mantel and did not touch it, and then he looked at her. "I have done a thing," he said, "and you should hear it from me before you hear it from the village." "What thing?" "I stood in my mother's drawing-room this afternoon. There were 6 young women there, brought for me to choose among. I have refused them. All of them. I told the room I mean to court you, openly, by your leave. I would not have you learn it from a laundry girl." The fire ticked. Eleanor put her hand flat on the table, the way she had while she waited for the knock. "You should not have said that in front of a room," she said. "A room is exactly where it should be said." A room heard the other thing. He did not name it. He did not have to. She was too old for any man here. It sat between them, spoken once by his mother, and now unspoken by him. "I ask your leave to call as a suitor, not a benefactor, a suitor. You may refuse me, but you should refuse the true thing, not a rumour." She thought of the rent, £30 at Lady Day. She thought of Clara asleep upstairs under a roof his slates had mended. She thought how easy it would be, and how the easy thing was the very thing she must not trust. "You may call," she said at last, "as a man, not as a rescue. The day it becomes a rescue, it ends." "Agreed," he said, and for the first time she saw the Duke smile like a boy. He called. Through October into November, the fine wheels came down the lane, and the village learned to watch for them and pretend it did not. He came the next week about the accounts, plainly the 2 of them at the table with a candle and her thin ledger between them, and he did not once offer to pay a farthing. He only helped her see where the pension stretched and where it tore. £12 for Thomas. £12 for Clara. £45 a year, and the arithmetic that would not close. He looked at it a long while and said nothing, and she loved him a little for saying nothing. And then, one grey afternoon near the end of November, he came and she cooked. It was the first meal she had made for a man since James. A plain fowl, bread, the last of the autumn apples. Thomas talked too much, and Clara too little, awed to silence by a duke at the table who cut his meat like anyone. Edmund ate every scrap and asked for more, and when the children were sent up he stayed by the fire, and the room went quiet in a way that was not empty. "Will you tell me," he said, "how he died? I have wanted to ask since I first came. I did not have the right." She looked at the sextant, brass gone gold in the firelight. She polished it every week. The children were forbidden to touch it, and did not, and looked at it the way one looks at a grave. Meridian," she said, "off the West Africa station." She struck in the dark, and went down inside the hour. James was at the glass. They told me after, the men who lived told me, that he never left it. Took the sights, called them steady, put boat after boat off into the sea by the numbers he read. The last man in the last boat said the lieutenant's voice never once shook. He got them off. He did not get himself off. She stopped. That is the sextant. He held one like it. I have kept this one bright, because a bright thing does not look dead. Edmund was quiet. Then he rose, and crossed to the stairs, and called up, gently, "Thomas, come down a moment." The boy came, wary. "Your mother tells me your father read the sea by an instrument like the one on the mantel," Edmund said. A man should know the shape of the thing his father was brave with. "May he hold it, Mrs. Prentiss?" She could not speak. She nodded. Thomas lifted it down with both hands, the way you lift something living. He held it to the window as if there were stars in the black glass. And Eleanor watched her son hold her husband and felt the old grief shift in her chest, not gone, never gone, but loosened, like a knot worked slack. Edmund did not touch her. He only stood beside her and let it happen. That was the night she stopped counting his visits as debts. She did not know that up at the park his mother was writing letters. The first had already gone, weeks before, to Captain Robert Hale, a fine hand on heavy paper, urging the good captain to press his honest suit before the widow overreached her station and made a fool of a great house. The second went now to a cousin who kept the registry at the bishop's court, asking only, delicately, whether anything might lie in the way of such a marriage. Anything at all. The dowager did not yet understand what she was asking for. She thought disapproval was a kind of law. It was Captain Hale who told Eleanor the truth. He came on a cold morning, hat in hand like the other one, but heavier in the shoulders, and he did not sit. "I have kept a thing from you," he said, "because I wanted you for myself. And that was not honest. You should know why the Duke came. He came about the school. He came about a debt." Hale's jaw worked. The Meridian, Eleanor, when she went down, James put the boats off by the numbers. In the last boat but one there was a midshipman, a boy of 17, Lord Henry Ashworth, the Duke's own younger brother. He let it land. James Prentiss put that boy in the boat and stayed at the glass. The Duke's brother is alive because your husband is not. Edmund Ashworth has known it for years. That is why the carriage came. That is the first slate, and the first mare, and the school. A debt of honour paid to a dead man's widow. The room tilted. Eleanor set her hand on the table. "Get out," she said. Not cruelly. She had no cruelty left. "Please, get out." When Edmund came the next day, she met him at the gate. She did not open it. Broad daylight, the lane empty, the frost still on the hedges. "I know why you came," she said. "Your brother. The last boat. You never told me my husband's death is the reason you learned my name." His face did not deny it. That was the worst of it. He did not even try. "It is how I came to you," he said. "It is not why I stayed. You cannot know the difference, nor can I. That is the trouble with a rescue. The drowning woman can never tell if the man loves her or only cannot let her sink." Her voice was steady. James's voice at the glass, she thought. Steady and going down. "I will not be a debt discharged in a wedding gown. I am too old to be flattered and not old enough to be bought." "Good day, Your Grace." She went in. She shut the door. She stood behind it with her hand pressed flat to the wood until his carriage turned and went, and then she wept where the children could not see. Up at the park the dowager heard of it within the day and believed she had won. She had the candidates recalled. She had Miss Veerley back at her elbow, 19 and certain, unable to conceive of being unchosen. She began to plan a spring wedding for a bride her son had already refused. But Captain Hale did the costly thing. He came to Edmund, two men who both loved the same woman, in a cold study with the fire low. "I withdraw," Hale said. "I could offer her a harbour. You have offered her a debt, and she has read it as one, and I could take her now on the rebound of it and call it kindness. I will not. Because I have watched you, sir, and I know a thing you had better go and tell her yourself." He set down his glass. "You do not look at that woman the way a man looks at a debt. You look at her the way a man looks at the one thing he was not permitted to want. I have loved her long enough to know the difference. Go and tell her plainly. Or by God, I will change my mind." Edmund did not go to her that day. He went to his solicitor. He could have taken a special licence. Near £30, a paper from Doctors' Commons, quiet, done in a single day, no banns, no room, no chance for any soul to say a word. His mother would have hated the marriage and been unable to prevent it, and it would have been over before the county drew breath. That was the instrument for a man in a hurry. He did not want it. Instead, he sat in a narrow office off the market square and did a slower, harder thing. "Draw a trust," he told the solicitor. "Irrevocable, £5,000 in the 3% consols to the sole and separate use of Mrs. Eleanor Prentiss, not to her husband on marriage, not to me, to her in her own right. Past the reach of any man including myself. The freehold of Wren Cottage, bought from the estate and conveyed to trustees for her. The schooling of both children funded to its end, and beyond my mother's reach, and beyond mine. Whatever she decides about me, this stands. If she never speaks to me again, this stands." The solicitor blinked over his spectacles. "Your Grace, if I may, this leaves you no hold upon the lady at all." "That," said Edmund, "is the entire point." He brought the deed to her himself, not folded in his hand like a purse, but plain on the table beside the lease she could not pay. He did not speak while she read it. He watched her read that she was, from this day, unpoor and unowned. That the rent that had haunted her was gone because the cottage was hers. That her children's future did not hang on her answer. That he had given away every lever a man might use to make her grateful. "You have made it impossible for this to be a rescue," she said, very low. "Yes, because a woman with £5,000 of her own needs no duke. Yes, then why?" He came round the table. He did not take her hand. He had solved so many feelings with instruments, the settlement, the slate, the mare, and he had nearly forgotten there was a plain thing that no instrument could say. "Because I do not want to marry a woman who needs me," he said. "I want to marry a woman who could refuse me and does not. I came for a debt. I stayed because you cut your ledger by candlelight and would not let me pay a farthing. I stayed because your boy holds his father's glass to the dark like there are stars in it. I am 41, and I have never once in my life chosen a thing for myself, and I am choosing you, and you are the first choice I have made that no one arranged. That is why. Now you may refuse me as a free woman, and I will go, and the trust still stands." She did not refuse him, and Edmund Ashworth, who solved everything with instruments, did one last deliberate thing. He went to the vicar of St. Aldhelm's and refused the licence on purpose. A licence would be quicker, Your Grace, the vicar said, surprised, and private. "A licence would spare the room, sir." Edmund's voice was quiet iron. "I mean it to be heard. Read the banns. 3 Sundays, the full and lawful 3. Let the whole parish be given its chance to stand and speak. I want no corner of this county able to say it was done in a corner." So on the first Sunday of Advent, the banns were read at St. Aldhelm's. The church was full. Word had run for a fortnight, and every pew was packed with people who had come to see. The vicar stood at the appointed place in the service, and in the plain, flat voice the law requires he said the words. "I publish the banns of marriage between Edmund George Ashworth, Duke of Wexcombe of this parish, and Eleanor Prentiss, widow of this parish. This is the first time of asking. If any of you know cause or just impediment why these two persons should not be joined together in holy matrimony, ye are to declare it. The whole county turned its head. You could hear the collars turn. In the great box pew the Dowager Duchess sat rigid as a poker, her chin up, her gloves knotted in her lap. Beside her Miss Veerley's colour climbed from her throat to her hairline, red as a slapped cheek, 19 years old, and hearing for the first time in her life a thing she could not have. Nobody spoke. The law waited its moment, and the moment passed in silence. The vicar went on with the service. Eleanor sat with her spine straight, the way she had walked out of the drawing-room, and looked at no one, and was looked at by everyone. On the second Sunday the church was fuller still. This is the second time of asking. If any of you know cause or just impediment, in the very back pew, in a plain coat, sat Captain Robert Hale. He had come on purpose. He heard the words, and he bowed his head, and he held his peace, and it cost him something you could see in the set of his shoulders. When the vicar moved on, the captain lifted his head again, and his face was calm, a man who had chosen the harder good and meant to keep it. Twice now the law had asked, and twice the parish had held its breath, and twice nothing rose against them. Once more remained. And the Dowager Duchess of Wexcombe had spent the week learning, at last, what an impediment actually was. The third Sunday of Advent. Saint, Aldhelms could not have held another soul. They stood along the walls, they stood in the porch. The whole of Nether Wexcombe and half the county besides had come to hear the third time of asking, because a rumour had gone round that the old Duchess meant to rise. The vicar reached the place. This is the third time of asking. If any of you know cause or just impediment why these two persons should not be joined together in holy matrimony, ye are now to declare it, or else hereafter forever hold your peace. The Dowager Duchess of Wexcombe rose to her feet. The church made a sound like a held breath let go. She stood in her black and her diamonds, a great lady on her feet, in the face of a whole parish, and her voice when it came was clear and cold, and carried to the porch. "I object," she said. "This marriage is unequal. It is unbecoming to the house of Wexcombe. The woman is a servant's widow, without rank or fortune, and I say she is not a fit duchess. I object to it with my whole authority." She had answered a room once. Now she thought a room would answer to her. The vicar did not raise his voice. He had been a country parson 40 years, and he had buried and married half the graves outside, and he was not afraid of a duchess in his own church. "Your Grace," he said gently, "I must ask you a single thing. The law permits only certain objections to stay a marriage. A pre-contract, that one of these persons is already promised in law to another. A prohibited kinship, that they are too near of blood, an existing marriage, a want of age or of consent. These are impediments, and any of them I am bound to hear." He paused. "Do you allege any such thing? Is the lady already married? Are they kin? Is there a lawful bar of any kind you can name?" The silence went on a long time. "I say she is beneath him," the dowager said. "That, Your Grace, is not an impediment." The old vicar said it kindly, and it fell like a blade for all that. Disapproval is not a bar known to the law. It is not a pre-contract. It is not kinship. It is not an existing marriage. I am very sorry. Unless you can name a lawful impediment, and it is plain you cannot, I must ask you to be seated, and I must complete the asking." For one moment she did not move. Every eye in the parish was on her. She had told a room, once, that a woman was too old for any man here, and no one had been able to answer her because she had not addressed it to the woman. Now she had addressed a room herself, and the room's own law had answered her, over her head, in front of everyone. And there was nothing in the world her authority could do about it. She had confused disapproval with power for so long, she had never learned they were not the same. She sat down. The vicar finished the third time of asking into a silence you could have cut. No impediment was shown. The banns stood. as the parish rose and began to file out, murmuring, stunned, joyful, scandalized. Edmund crossed to his mother's pew. He did not make a scene. He bent, close, so that only she and those nearest could hear, and his voice was very quiet. "You said it to a room, madam," he said. "You numbered the women a duke might marry, and you did not number her, and you said she was too old, and you said it to a room precisely so that she could not answer it without confessing she had listened." He straightened his gloves. "I have answered you in the one place on this earth where the whole parish was obliged, by law, to stay and hear. 3 times over. It is finished." He gave her his arm to rise. She took it, because there was nothing else to take. And they walked out of the church together into the Advent cold, the broken authority and the son who had, once in his life, chosen for himself. They were married at St. Aldhelm's in the New Year, when the frost lay hard on the graves and the church smelled of cold stone and evergreen. Thomas carried the ring on a cushion, solemn as a judge, and did not drop it. Clara, 8 and horse mad and given her one great task, scattered gorse yellow down the aisle by the handful and grinned at everyone. The old grey mare, Duchess, stood placid in the churchyard with a ribbon in her mane that Clara had plaited badly and loved fiercely. And that evening, at Wexcombe Park, in the great house that had never once thought to invite the naval widow anywhere in particular, a servant carried in a brass sextant and set it on the mantel of the family drawing-room, where it caught the fire and threw the light soft on the high ceiling. Lieutenant James Prentiss's glass, polished every week for years by a woman doing sums under her breath, a relic of a cold sea and a steady voice going down. It sat now on a duke's mantel, in a warm room, in a living house, and it was not a grave any longer. It was an heirloom. Thomas would have it one day. He had been allowed to hold it, and now he would be allowed to keep it, and the ghost had loosened without leaving, which is the most any of us can ask of our dead. Spring came, and one bright morning at breakfast in the great house, Eleanor, Duchess of Wexcombe, poured her own tea. She did it in her own right. There was a deed folded in a drawer upstairs that she alone held the key to. £5,000 in the consols, the freehold of a little cottage she still walked down to see, the children's schooling secured past the reach of any duke or dowager living. She was not a rescued woman pouring a man's tea in a man's house. She was a woman with her own money and her own children and her own name, who had chosen freely. A man who had made himself refusable and been chosen anyway. The dowager took her breakfast at the same table now, in a chastened quiet. It was Eleanor who broke it, once, mildly, passing the older woman the toast. "I have been thinking, madam," she said, "of a thing you once said to a room, that I was too old for any man here." She poured. "I find I am precisely old enough." The dowager said nothing, but she took the toast. Miss Cassandra Verley left the county not long after to try the London season, where a 19-year-old heiress might yet be chosen by someone, and where no one had watched her go red to the hairline in a country church. And Captain Robert Hale, who had loved Eleanor enough not to win her, sent to Wexcombe Park in the spring a small tin of naval brass polish and a card in a plain sailor's hand. It said only, "Fair winds, ma'am." Edmund sent him, by return, a private word of thanks that no one else ever read, and the two men understood each other perfectly and never spoke of it again. The sextant caught the morning light on its new mantle. Outside, Clara was on the grey mare in the paddock, shrieking with joy. Thomas was at his books, bound for a school no one could take from him. And a woman the world had numbered out of its reckoning sat in a house that had once forgotten to invite her, drinking tea she had poured herself, chosen and independent, and precisely old enough. Some cruelties are aimed at a room on purpose. They are spoken sideways, so the one they wound cannot answer, because to answer is to confess you were listening. They count on that silence. They live in it. But every so often, someone answers anyway. Not in the room. In the one place the whole parish is obliged to stay and hear 3 times over, until the law itself says the bans shall stand. If someone once discussed your future in front of you as though you had already finished having one, I hope you are watching this from somewhere warm, with your own tea, poured by your own hand. Tell me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels.